Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I hope you had a nice lunch break. And well, here we are again with the chair of housing studies of Barcelona still in our minds, as we heard from Judith Gifreu and Josep Maria Montaner. We are now going to talk about a different topic, innovation. We are all connected through Mentimeter, either whether you're at home or in your office or here. You can send us your questions and the moderator will convey them and ask the presenters at the end of the talk. Mentimeter is very easy. You need to go on to the website menti.com. You are going to be asked a code, which is the same all throughout the day, 78939 It is presented on the screen at the moment, so you can copy it, and any question you might have, any doubts you might have, well, you can convey it through Mentimeter. And now I would like to give the floor to the moderator, Analia Plazas. She's a journalist. She works for El Periódico de España, and she will tell us about innovation. She will present this panel discussion on innovation in public development of housing. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the morning sessions. Before we begin, I would like to thank the organizers for the work that they do and for the agenda they have prepared over the last few months. I really thank you to hear about housing for such a multidisciplinary perspective from the scholarly world and from the public world, and not only from the perspective of the real estate industry, which is what often happens. The panel discussion I have the luck to moderate is called Innovation in Public Promotion of Housing. So the idea now is to present a number of innovative initiatives on public development, public housing development, and to analyze which experiences could be then copied in other cities, duplicated in other cities, and what are the main challenges that lay ahead. I know a little bit about what each speaker is going to talk about, and I'm sure we will enjoy about these new examples and innovative techniques they will share with us. I have here with me the four panelists, one from a different city. Here we have Gerard Capó. He is an officer at the Barcelona Municipal Institute for Housing and Renovation. Next to him sits Felipe Castro. He is the General Director of a public housing company from Seville. Then we have Cristina Ballester. She's the General Director of the Housing Institute of the Balearic Islands. And finally, we have Masira Vasiloko, who is a former Counselor of Housing in Vienna. And she, well, Vienna is a city that is always, well, an important landmark in anything that has to do with public housing or affordable housing. So I will now, without further ado, start giving the floor to the different speakers who will make a brief presentation about their experience in their city, and we will finish with a discussion between them and with the audience. So let me give the floor to Gerard. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here today. Just let me say that for someone who has been operated recently of cataracts, this is a testing experience, being under the spotlight as I am at the moment. But let's hope I can be up to the circumstances. When I was asked to talk about innovation in public housing promotion, or public housing development, I thought, well, let's see what we are discussing here. And I thought either we look at this from the perspective of the different tools and instruments we have developed, or else let's have a look at direct development. And when I talk about tools and instruments, I'm thinking about, for instance, some agreements such as the Metropolitan Housing Operator and some associations that are non-profit, then we decided to start doing some direct development with some innovative elements. We will talk about two projects. One is the refurbishment of a factory with the construction of housing within the factory, and then we have proximity housing that have been built reusing and recycling maritime containers. We've been told that we are in a hurry, so I'll be quick. Let's start with the Can Fabra G Nave. It is an old factory that, well, this is a factory premises. The structure of the factory is 100 meters long, 15 meters wide, and 11 meters tall. It's split into two stories, two floors, and the purpose of the commission, which was innovative in itself, was how to bring together this structure. How can we combine such a factory structure with, well, the construction of housing inside? The purpose in itself was quite innovative. These are some views of the original factory. This is the first story and the second story with completely clear and how clear structures, and we wanted to build as respectfully as possible. We wanted to include wooden elements. This image is very clear. This is what existed in the past, the open plan floors, the two levels, and how these modules, these wooden modules, can be included in here. In the end, we will have 4 stories within the envelope, within the original structure. This allows us to say, okay, let's do this reversible. Let's undo the woodwork if necessary, although that's not the purpose at all. These are some of the images, some of the views from the inside. Most of the housing is done in wood. Why? Well, because wood is lighter than steel structures, and this allowed us to avoid having to refurbish the outer structure and the foundations. It's drywalling, all assembled, and it can be disassembled in the future if necessary. We now have well, the old building, the old envelope acts as thermal isolation, and we have 2 corridors for air circulation. It acts as thermal buffer, and the top is like the roofing of the buildings. This is a low environmental impact building. And the third innovation, here we're having some views of what it was in the past, what it is at the moment. The third element for innovation is that inside this industrial warehouse, we have the common spaces, some open plan structures which provide for exchanges between the neighbors. We looked at an initial plan. Actually, the work that we started on that chapter stopped with the pandemic, but we were discussing with the neighbors about what could be the eventual use of all these areas. So you see, for instance, the lobby, which is really huge and can have a community use. This is the design of the plan with the 2 corridors which are left there inside of the warehouse building, but outside of the housing units. This is the look, the general plan of the factory. And then we wanted to look at the different models, and not only architectural or social innovation, but rather to study the model. And this provisional proximity housing. Here we proposed to reuse maritime containers to create structures that would allow for quick accommodation. This is an innovative element because we are reusing existing elements. It is quick. It takes much less time to put together a development of this sort than with traditional housing. And then the cladding of containers, of the original containers, we said that this was a quick, we're reducing 58% of all waste. We have a lower CO2 emission impact. Once everything is built, then we install the elevators, the staircases, and all of the common areas. These are containers. As such, and they were added to the structure. The ground floor is usually common facility. The ground floor is usually common spaces, and this is the building process that we have underway at the moment. We have a 12-module development in Ciutat Vella. And here you see as the containers pile up, and then what it looks like at the end with the cladding and the facade that we add to the containers. This is the inside, and it's very standard. It looks like a normal house. And we have two additional projects that we are building at the moment, one in Ciutat Vella and this other one in Sant Martí, managed by the Social Services Municipal Institute, and this other one, Sans Montjuïc, the one on top, which is being built by our organization, our institute, 10 stories high, 40 houses or in housing units, and each module is 1.5. Each housing unit is 1.5 containers, so to say, to make it a little bit bigger. And that's about it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
Mola. Yo no tengo un cronómetro. Yo creo que ha estado bien.
That was quick.
Bueno,
don't worry.
Gracias. El siguiente en presentar va a ser
The next one to present is Felipe Castro. He comes from the Sevilla Municipal Housing Company. Good afternoon to you all, says the speaker in Catalan. I had written this down, so at least I can speak in Catalan. I would like to thank the organizers for this spectacular venue that we are here, and well, the refurbishment is spectacular, to cry out because of the beauty of this place. And then I would like to thank Javier, because we've had a very easy going exchange between himself and Sevilla and the housing system. I think that exchanges help us improve, and they help us make things worse and to improve the starting situation. The last time we met, we were in Seville, and we were talking about innovation, and we said that innovation was a need. It had become an urgent need in housing policy. It had been really difficult to add innovation to our policies. Usually we were working in simply housing developments and people were, well, our company was doing simply construction work, housing, and we have a small portion that is devoted to rent, 2,800 housing units. And we decided to move more into that. We are working in Seville. The town planning was passed in 2006. You know what happened in 2008? All the buildable land was not developed to develop a public housing offer. And then in 2002, we had a law to preserve part of the land for housing, and those that were booked for landing, well, were not available at the time to build a public housing, so we had to use the built city, and that's where we act mostly, and we are trying to get existing housing units, for instance, by swapping also the use of land, and or by buying simply housing units. And as our city was basically full, average age is 53 years old. Most of the housing, or a large part of the housing, is 4 stories high or more, and many of the families who were locked down for months there, well, when they bought those houses, they had a certain age, so they were able to go up 4 stories without any problem, and now they don't have an elevator in that building, and they were having trouble to get there. So those apartments became like prisons, and as we knew that we needed to renovate the public and the private housing stock, and at the same time we wanted to increase social housing and affordable housing, especially for the more vulnerable groups, then we decided we had to do something different. We have developed a strategy to include cooperative housing as part of the public system to protect the underprivileged or the most vulnerable families, for instance, returned immigrants, persons who lose access to their homes because of a divorce, people who have had an eviction, people under 35, and so on. But the idea was to include other groups, such as people over 55, or students, or university students, university researchers, elite athletes, with the purpose to create a fabric, a network that would allow for interaction between the different groups, and so that these would act as
Disculpa, ¿te puedes quitar la mascarilla o que te saquen el micrófono? Que me han dicho que se está oyendo un poquito mal.
Sorry, I forgot to remove my face mask, and I was choking. I was choking. Sorry. Thank you for telling me. Now I can breathe a bit better. And well, what we are trying is to create a public network of collaborative housing based on this existing city, which is already basically at the verge of collapse, where we try to create exchanges and which can be used as an exchange forum. It's a sort of a civic center, a social community center, so to say. And we are defining our strategies for the future, and where we stand now, looking at the current housing plan, we are going to invest 400 and odd million euros and in 500 units. Here we have some homes which were given to us to define how we are going to build the whole system, which is currently being in tenders for architects. These are publicly managed projects which allow for the tenants to have all the services. They have light, water supply, fiber, access to internet, as well as all the furniture, all the services. This is lent by the city council. by the Municipal Housing Institute, because this is a way to cater for emergency situations for vulnerable populations. We have seen that these kind of programs are very well combined with the procurement, with the buying of houses. So we buy homes from people so that they can become our tenants. In the past, the law did not allow for this. For instance, if an elderly person has a home but doesn't have owns a home but doesn't have any income, those persons couldn't even lead a normal life, because they were basically locked up in their homes without any resources, without any income. And when we were thinking about how we could include these persons in the family, well, we realized they had an asset we could use. These homes could be added to our municipal housing stock, and that's what we do. We renovate them, and then we can give this to other families who don't have difficulties, as they didn't have 40 years ago, to live in those areas, which are in those homes which are probably not suitably equipped for elderly people. So this is what we're doing. We are including more and more homes to our public stock, especially from homes in the city center, which is intention, or areas that are so busy and so, well, yeah, there's so much people living there that there is a high tension. This is Sevilla. In any case, that's all I wanted to say, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And let me make myself available to you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Felipe. Luego hay tiempo para preguntas.
Thank you very much, Felipe. There'll be time for questions later on. Don't worry. We will now move on and hand over to Cristina Ballester, General Manager of the Institut Balear de l'Habitatge, so Balearic Islands Housing Institute. I would like to thank the Barcelona City Hall and Javier and the City of Barcelona. Thank you for hosting the event, and thank you for having me. Congratulations on the award that was granted to Seville. We and the Balearic Islands also received a prize, so it's a good occasion to say thanks and congratulate our fellow partners. And we would like to explain that we are increasing the public housing stock. We guarantee 64% more, so more than 1,000 new dwellings in the Balearic Islands. The original number is 1,600, so it's quite a lot. I had brought a video. I don't know if we can watch it. It's only 1 minute long video. So if it's up, we maybe can start watching the video. We will change the public housing paradigm. We promote the cities of the future, more sustainable, greener, proper, and worthy. Article 47 in the Spanish Constitution, all Spaniards may enjoy the right to housing. We incorporate over 1,000 new public houses. These are under construction. We are preparing the projects for 301 new houses. They have been acquired via preemptive right, and we will carry on. We will face the housing emergency and the climate crisis. Low environmental impact architecture, reducing CO2 emissions, sustainable premises, kilometer zero, so proximity. We promote urban mining projects, circular economy. We will try to make as much out of waste as possible, energy efficiency, gender perspective being cross-cutting in all our projects. We are not living in a house. We are all sharing the same ecosystem. Great. So that's the summary of my presentation. End of the story. Now, what we are trying to do is to take into account, especially while we are refurbishing or building new flats, we try to incorporate this strategy right from the beginning. until we are handed the keys to the apartment. So we understand sustainability as a holistic sustainability, because of course there's no need to even describe what housing emergency means. So climate emergency is a fact, healthcare emergency linked to an economic recession, which happen every now and then. So lots of emergencies and lots of crises, and we need to take into account the three basic aspects here: social, environmental, and economic value. So the three tiers, the three pillars, and trying to minimize the negative externalities and foster the positive aspects. So we want to contribute to this sustainable development goals, because if we need to face the housing emergency, sustainable cities and communities, we need to make sure that everyone has the right to housing. So we need to increase the public housing stock. Very important. And the public authorities in Spain, I believe, are not on top of it too much, which is the public sector contracting law. I'm going to put it simply. It's to provide more importance to the economic offer and to include environmental clauses. And we are clear as to that in the Balearic Islands. So in the tenders, there's always a social clause that states that if the companies want to do something, because the economic offer is 10 points and the rest of the values are environmental or social. So if the companies are willing to contribute to a project in the third sector, for instance, that is focusing on reducing the impact of housing emergency, this provides more points to them. So it's another tier. Healthcare and well-being. Let's take another example now, because the idea is to reduce a third, reduce the mortality rate, early mortality rate by a third, caused by non-transmissible disease by means of prevention and treatment. So promoting health care and mental health and well-being. So we want to socially contribute to a healthier society, and we want to also reduce energy poverty, and this goes hand in hand with the action for the climate and for the decreased consumption. Because if the households need to pay less for their utilities, we reduce the global consumption, and the households can actually enjoy more income. So they are calmer, they are healthier, and the degrees of default, of course, go down. So it's circular economy, and circular meaning that it's not only to do with the environment, but also it's to do with the social part of the story. So the investments are also focusing on these sustainable constructions, systems that are alternative, let's put it this way, that try to find the way to totally reduce the impact on the planet. So types of materials that we use, for instance, the marine plants, marine algae that are being used, as you know, life reducing Posidonia in Formentera is one of the projects, and we are always trying to find the best ways. For instance, sandstone, Posidonia as isolation material, for instance, or cross ventilation, so that no air conditioning is required. So kilometer zero is important from the economic and social perspective, and the industry in the Balearic Islands has actually gone back to work, because there was no demand so far, and since there is now demand for these materials, that has an impact on the competitiveness of the Balearic Islands. So we can contribute for the local industries and the competitiveness of the Balearic Islands, while at the same time providing for a public rental housing stock. Land is provided by the city halls, and since they are aligned, of course, they grant the permits faster, because we are in the regional government, and then the terms and deadlines are shorter and shorter, and we can start and finish earlier with the constructions. And then let's move to another aspect, goal number 12, consumption. We want to face waste, and we want to give points to the companies that will use green energy for the whole duration of the construction period, or when they make an effort in terms of waste management and beyond what's in the technical specs. Urban mining is another project, so waste being considered as a resource that is going to be reused and reutilized. And then gender equality. We provide housing when there's gender perspective, in the sense that the kitchen is open, for instance, and we try to prevent the creation of darker spaces. So we want the hallways to be open and lighter, so that there are no incidents, so that gender violence is diminished. So the strategy in the Balearic Islands includes these three pillars, so more objectives, not just one, and we want to cover many more aspects, and we've just wanted to share this with you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Cristina. Last but not least, Maria Vasilako, former Urban Consulting Vienna Solutions.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am really excited to be here with you in Barcelona. Let me start by stating I have worked for the Viennese government for almost 10 years, but I was responsible for urban development and planning, not for housing. But I will be sharing with you the experience, the Viennese experience of growing our social housing and public housing stock, and also of innovating. And in terms of innovating the entire system, we will have a glimpse at it in 1 second. We have been working, of course, very, very, very closely with my colleague in government who was responsible for housing. So, best case Vienna. Now, this sounds quite ambitious. Let me take you to Vienna for the next couple of minutes and share with you what we have been doing there. Now, let's start by stating Vienna is a rapidly growing city. We grow at a pace of approximately 25,000 new residents per year, which means that we have to build a small town in addition each and every year. You may have heard that Vienna is actually one of the world's capitals of public and social housing. So we have a tradition of 100 years social housing. What you here see is a historical example. And I should also say, even back then, the city would not just build houses, they would build almost urban quarters. So these were buildings with very high quality, with rooms to share for community, with schools, with libraries, with even swimming pools, actually, back then in the yards. And here's another example that shows how this has been done approximately 100 years ago. I think interesting are the figures right now. So 62% of all Viennese people who are living in rented flats live either in public housing or social housing units. The city invests more than 500 billion per year, and there's an active land policy. This because land prices had started getting more and more expensive, so we introduced a couple of years ago an amendment in our building code that says that whenever somebody plans to erect more than 150 housing units, then 2/3 of them have to be subsidized housing, which of course has an effect on land prices. So this is actually the figures to show you how we arrive at this 62%. And we keep, of course, planning 7,000 subsidized housing units per year. So it's not always the same figure each year, but in general, we erect several thousand subsidized housing units per year. Now, how does this work altogether? Let me just skip this. This is about our smart city framework strategy. We want to provide maximum life quality to all of our citizens, consuming as little resources as possible by innovation, by applying new technologies, new solutions, and taking new directions. And there's the three-pillar strategy to all this. It's affordability, livability, and community. So what you here see, for example, is one new urban quarter that is, 2/3 of it are already completed, and this is an artificial lake, and in the backdrop you can see actually subsidized housing. So this is just an example of how we go about this. Now, there are high standards, so whatever is being created, erected in form of subsidized housing has to meet high architectural, ecological, cost efficiency, and participatory standards. And how we organize this is by organizing competitions. That means every non-for-profit corporation that want to construct, to erect a subsidized building have to choose a team of architects and will then compete against each other for one piece of land. And the criteria are, as you can see here, social sustainability, architectural quality, economic sustainability, and ecological quality. And in a minute you will see what this results in. So the state of play, there is constant innovation, and just to give you one example, what you here see is an urban quarter, a small urban quarter called Eurogate that was erected 100% entirely in passive house standard, which is, by the way, the largest passive house development that there is in Europe right at the moment. And we're experimenting a lot with concrete, wood, so timber constructions. We have some restrictions because of fire safety. So I would love to bring the people from the fire safety department to Barcelona to show them a little bit what can be done. But as you can see, we're experimenting a lot, and there's a lot that is being constructed in wood, or at least partially in wood. So what you can here see is actually one project that I love that lost the competition. So you may ask, how much better was the one that won? Well, I was not in the jury, so I took my favorite. I can do it. So the city, once again, invests more than 500 million per year, and there's a threefold subsidy that goes with it. So subsidized housing is erected on cheap land. Part of it is actually purchased by the city, so there's a land fund that will buy it and then sell it to housing corporations at a very cheap price. Then there is a subsidy, a direct subsidy for construction, and then there's also a subsidy for residents, for future residents, so for the citizens who may still not be able to afford the entry price. And here's actually more or less something, I think that these will be published later on, so anybody who is interested in this can look at this. This is the whole governance structure. It's there for you to take a look later. So let me arrive at a few examples, and then I'll leave it at that. First of all, what is life quality, though? Because it is about life quality. It is, and when we're talking about innovation in social housing as well, it is about life quality. I say life quality is living in a place that's good for children. Why? Well, it's because young people, when they know that the first child is arriving, they feel like we have to move to the countryside or to the suburbs and buy a little cottage if we can, or rent it, so that the child can have a happy childhood and have access to nature and perhaps to water and be able to move around and play freely. And once they have done that, this is where they spend the rest of their lives, okay, in hideous traffic jams, trying to get to work and bring the kids to school. So what we said in Vienna is, and this is actually a new urban quarter, which is 2/3 approximately subsidized housing. We are not building objects, we are building actually neighborhoods. We are building urban quarters. So we put immense focus on the architectural qualities of the building, but also in the qualities of public space. So what you can here see once again is the same quarter. All that you can see in the backdrop is actually subsidized housing. So vast green spaces that have to be accessible to everybody 24 hours per day, 7 days a week, allowing for diverse uses and very dense edges. So we we're not afraid of high-rise buildings, to put it this way. What you can here see is another perspective of the same urban quarter. On the left is subsidized housing. The backdrop, by the way, is free market housing. So we always look into it that there's a mix of everything, sometimes even in the same building, but most of the times not really. But I would ask you, I would challenge you to come and actually take a guess what is subsidized and what not. You would never find out. So there's a broad mix of projects once again. And here, when it comes to innovation at the level of buildings, besides example given, very, very, once again, extremely high efficiency in terms of energy consumption, even passive standard, what you can here see is, for instance, projects here that were extremely innovative in terms of mobility. So in this urban quarter, we have one house that is called Bike City. For instance, it has, besides all other amenities, lifts, so large lifts, so you can take the bicycles upstairs. It has balconies where you can store the bicycles. It has bicycle garages. There's car sharing, but no garages for cars. Just to give you an example of the way we go about it, there's another project here in the same area. It's called Bike and Swim, and it has a swimming pool on the rooftop. And this is actually economically sustainable if you skip, of course, building garages for cars. So the idea is also to work this way. And the last project that I would love to share with you is actually the most current recent twist, let's put it this way, in Vienna's social housing tradition. These are collaborative housing projects. Now, these projects are created entirely by their own residents. They're planned entirely by them. Each and everyone can plan their own units, and they have spaces for community. So this specific project, for instance, the cafe that you can see is actually managed by the tenants. They have also a shared large kitchen for parties. They have conference rooms in the cellar and whatnot. And this is actually also part, again, of this kind of social innovation that results out of budget that you can reallocate for such uses because of not creating garages underneath each and every object. The community farming just around the corner. And I will leave it at that and say thanks for listening.
Vale, muchas gracias, María.
Great, thank you very much, Maria. I believe we have about 15 minutes, 15, 17 tops for debate, which is not bad. So I would like to start myself with a broad question, maybe. So after having heard what you just explained, if you were to recommend something to another city, something you think it's easy to replicate, to implement in Madrid or in any other city that's not here represented, what would be your first tip, maybe, or first suggestion?
We believe, I mean, what we can export to other places or things that we can copy from other cities, because I would copy a few things. Yeah, but I mean, if anybody is looking at our chats and what could be replicable in a more easy way, in an easier way, because maybe building a whole district is going to be kind of difficult, right? I believe that the APROP project could be quite exportable, either with maritime containers or with other alternatives the market offers, and that we are the Institute are proposing as well, because we have also been working with other alternatives. These are models that allow you to streamline the building process. So I'm sure these would be interesting for Madrid or for any other city, as long as they fit into your goals. But it is easy to adapt, because in the end, How long did it take you to build each of these? Well, the construction is about 10, 14 months, I would say. So if we compare that with traditional building systems, it's half the time, a bit less than half. So this gives you a little bit of leeway. Of course, this is it can be replicated elsewhere. In my case, it's also easy to replicate. Taking a run-down building and to renovate it for collaborative building, as we do, is fantastic. Or as facilities, as common facilities and equipment for the district. That's perfectly feasible. The thing is, very often cities have public buildings, publicly owned buildings, which were used as facilities, public facilities such as, I don't know, for instance, services offered by the autonomous communities, like day centers or other things, and they are not in use any longer, and they could be renovated and refurbished and turned into either proximity housing or proximity facilities. I think it's just a question of doing it instead of selling it and having somebody else develop those plots of land. Are there any questions? If not, I will continue asking my own questions, but if you have any questions from the floor? Yes, somebody says that if the strong investment in public housing in Vienna, is it done basically for homes for rent or homes for sale? What is the proportion?
It's basically homes for rent, and there's a small proportion also for homes for sale. Yes.
Vale.
By the way, you forgot to ask me what I would actually export and what I would import.
Tell us.
And I just wanted to say I would import definitely the container model. Okay, from Barcelona, and I would export the collaborative housing model, where tenants, can plan actually themselves.
Vale, gracias. There's another one for you, María. ¿Cómo eligen los usuarios cómo se eligen los usuarios?
How do you choose the users of collaborative housing projects? And then let me say as well, if the land is in cession or is it sold?
Okay. Now, there are several groups that are engaging in this. So what you have to do basically is to apply to be part of one of these groups. And what we do on behalf of the city is that when we develop new urban quarters, we always reserve at least 3 to 4 parcels of land to be allocated to these groups. So you wait for a while and then it's your turn. Now, the most interesting part of it is that it is sold, but not individually. So what then happens is that you own, in a sense, a small part of the entire project, but not your flat. And once you leave, you cannot choose who will come yourself. So it belongs to the entirety of the group. And I think that this is extremely important, because what we wanted to do in Vienna is that in these cases, it still remains affordable. So nobody starts speculating, and nobody, sells it and resells it, and then it comes to free market prices.
Vale. ¿Hay más preguntas?
Okay, further questions?
Sí.
Is there a tension between affordability and environmental sustainability? A tension between affordability and environmental sustainability. I don't quite understand what the question means, but if we understand tension as a clash, I don't know if that's what it means. Are they incompatible, affordability and environmental sustainability? There's a clear answer, and it's no, because in the end, climate change impact is something we all pay together. So anything that happens will affect us all. So in the end, on a macro level, that's what happens, and on a micro level, if a family that is vulnerable, or maybe not, but it has a certain amount of available income, needs to pay so much for electricity and bills and so on, well then the purchasing power of that family or of that household will be higher. So we might have built a little bit more expensive, but it doesn't mean that it is necessarily more expensive if we have built with more sustainable materials and then we don't have air conditioning, the need of air conditioning. Well, that's no incompatibility, I would say. Microphone, please. We also need to be promoters of sustainability, we as private developers, as public developers. And I understand, for instance, containers brings together both things because they are sustainable and affordable. The container in itself is not environmentally friendly, but as we reuse it, then it does have a positive impact. Question for Cristina. Are you acting on all the Balearic Islands? You talked about new housing units. How are they spread? I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact percentages, but we are in all. For instance, in Formentera, there is now one in the architects contest phase. There's another one with 86 units and another one with 52. In Menorca, we also have 4 developments, ongoing developments, plus 3 in different stages, and the rest are in Mallorca. So we do have presence in all the Balearic Islands. Further questions? Any questions from the floor here? Can I offer somebody in the audience to ask the questions? Would you like to ask any questions or comments? Yes, there's a question from the floor. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ángel Fernández. I am from Getafe, the municipal company. And my question has 2 parts. In cities where the most, well, rather than urban development, we have regeneration because basically the city limits are exhausted and we cannot build anything new there, then the solution of building more housing is kind of complex, right? I guess in Barcelona you are coming closer to that situation. But in Seville, if the solution is to extend the city, then we tend to concentrate the population in large cities. And that leads to a territorial unbalance as well, right? Doesn't it? So town planning, not the city council, but the ability to plan for the whole territory, even on a state level, is essential, I would say. I'm sure there are many solutions, but it depends on each city. And cities like mine, where the possibility of new land development for housing has lots of constraints, then how do you play with that? How do you deal with that in cities where it is difficult to build afresh because there's no land? I mean, the city has exhausted its territory. Maria.
This question, I think that we're all moving towards a direction where it is also about knocking down old buildings and replacing them with higher ones, which is, by the way, unsustainable as well. So the next step, in terms of innovation will be how to densify without knocking down. So no new ways of, kind of still achieving new heights. The second issue, of course, has to do with converting industrial land or other types of covered land and converting them into new developments or new urban quarters. Mm-hmm. And for sure, it will not be easily to, let's say, to densify the edges of smaller towns for one reason, for one very crucial reason. Actually, what is being discussed right now, it's not being discussed, it's been actually, it is law right now that we are not to build on green land anymore. which means that actually building on green land and agricultural land, even in smaller towns, surrounding towns of large cities, is the same issue as building at the borders of the city itself. So if you look into the EU taxonomy, one of the main criteria is to not cover green land with construction anymore. So I think, looking into the future, once again, there is no other way than knocking down and replacing.
Vale. ¿Algún consejo?
Any advice here? Yes, we share the same problem. We don't have the ability to build large developments, and then we need to use the land that used to be productive in different fields, and they become, industrial land that becomes residential land or whatever. Many of the industries that attracted people who left the countryside to come to the city, most of these industries have already disappeared, and they left a legacy of industrial buildings from the 50s and 70s that deserve no more than demolition. But they could give rise to new homes. Of course, they have constraints, but it would be more environmentally sustainable and socially sustainable too. And in the end, the only thing that is left for us is to renovate the inside of the city. I mean, there isn't much way around it. That's it. We need to find solutions such as the ones you mentioned, increasing the density, or using brownfields, or implementing new measures such as adding protected housing in urban activities. And this is the only thing that we can do in this territory. Yes, there's a new bill, a new decree that in equipment areas, in facilities areas, we can now do social housing as well. And we're also doing the nice thing of not only building in the capital, Palma, the Majorca. We need to build somewhere else. With the pandemic, lots of people realized how good it was to live in smaller cities, but we need to do this to disseminate a little bit. This idea of using industrial facilities, or, for instance, public land, does that mean that everything has to go for housing? If those plots were planned for industries and for other kind of activities, it was probably because that was necessary. If we invest everything in residential land, then wouldn't it be too uniform without any mixicity? Wouldn't it be so? Town planning contemplates exchanges among the plots of land while keeping the necessary diversity, combining green areas, green spaces, plus office buildings, housing buildings, and so on. And you try to find a balance, because that's something any city needs. When you densify, you need to add the necessary facilities for those living here. So it's not only housing. We also need facilities.
If I may add to this, I think that in this respect, it's always about creating new urban quarters. But the main question is how much of the residential uses will be free market and how much will be subsidized housing. And I think that it is always an opportunity when, converting former industrial land to create more subsidized housing, because this land's cheaper, or used to be cheaper. Let's put it this way.
Bueno, no nos queda tiempo para más. Con esto tenemos que terminar.
We don't have time for more. It's unfortunately, we will have to bring this discussion to an end, but I'm sure that you can contact them offline and ask questions. Thank you very much to all of those who attended, and I hope you liked this discussion, and I hope you found it useful too. Thank you.